On this episode of Omnivore, understanding and working with Gen Z food professionals, top trends in functional foods, and innovations in upcycling. This is Omnivore from the editors of Food Technology Magazine and the Institute of Food Technologists.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by IFT FIRST Food Improved by Research, Science, and Technology. Join food system professionals at McCormick Place in Chicago, July 13 through 16, for the industry's premier event connecting innovation, science, and business. Learn more at iftevent.org.
Welcome to Omnivore from IFT and Food Technology, where we explore the intersection of business, science, and technology in the global food system. I'm Bill McDowell. The first half of Generation Z, those individuals born between 1997 and 2012, has officially entered the workforce. Their arrival has shaken up the status quo across all industries, including food. But some baby boomer and even a few millennial managers suggest this cohort is not ready for work. As noted in a 2024 survey conducted by Intelligent.com, many managers complain this new generation of workers lacks motivation, professionalism, and adequate communication skills. Food Technology's Deputy Managing Editor Kelly Hensel spoke with Huy Nguyen, Chief Education and Career Development Advisor at Intelligent.com, about some misconceptions, the digital skills that Gen Z employees bring to the table, and how to build a successful working relationship across generations.
So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about, in general, for Gen Z, what are some of those common misconceptions about maybe Gen Z and the workforce and how they operate?
You know, Gen Z is a different generation, especially new grads that are coming from college that have spent a lot of their time, with remote learning in that type of environment. Now they're going into the workforce, and they're a little bit different than what's currently in the workforce right now. So, this may sound familiar, actually, as the millennials had entered the workforce. Some of the same terms are being used. So Gen Z is entitled, is lazy, lacks work ethic, easily offended, and is unprepared for the workforce. But to be honest, I don't think it's anything new. If you go back and look at headlines 10 to 12 years ago, and you just replace Gen Z with millennials entering the workforce, you'll find the exact same terms being used. So I do think that a lot of it has to do with, as the new generation, Gen Z, comes in and starts to outnumber the boomer generation that is leaving the workforce, these things become a lot more prevalent in the discussion.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I agree with you. That does seem to always be that, history of, these young kids today.
That's right. That's right.
So I get that. And so I guess on the flip side, what characteristics or qualities does Gen Z have by the nature of, their age and how they were raised that may actually be an advantage in the workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. They carry huge advantages, especially with all of the digital transformation that's going on, affecting industries kind of throughout, the workforce. They are digitally native. They grew up with mobile devices in their hands. That's how they're used to communicating. They can pick up, learning new technology. They're probably the most highly skilled generation that's entering the workforce today. So with that, there are a tremendous amount of advantages for them. They can actually help with organizations or companies or brands that are looking to, to change or to transform and to modernize their own workforce. I think that, having these highly skilled people entering the workforce can be quite a big asset to people that are looking to make change within their own organizations.
That's great. Yeah. And I think it is interesting that, like you said, I think a lot of companies are going through this digital transformation right now. So taking advantage of their innate knowledge of all things digital is going to make a lot of sense for many companies. I guess, what are some of those ways that employers or companies can attract younger talent? Like, what are those Gen Z employees looking for when it comes to a job?
Yeah, I think that this generation, they've seen, especially in the past few years, where brands, their peers as well, the content that they consume on social media, a lot of people are talking about, personal values, right? And so this doesn't just come from the people that are entering the workforce or the younger generation, but we've seen brands take social stances about what they believe in. They are showing value, showing culture. So I think that there is a lot of that desire for people that are, just recent grads entering the workforce to find companies that match up with them and their values. So, I think that that is important for them more than just getting a job. They want to align with the company and with the brand that shares similar values to them, and the work becomes, more meaningful for them. So I think that, brands and companies that are looking to attract Gen Z need to take that into consideration on how that's being messaged publicly.
Is work-life balance really important for Gen Z? Are they looking to make sure that, they're not clocking in 12 hours a day like some boomers or millennials or Gen X's out there?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I would say that, it's kind of both ends of the spectrum on that one. So there are a lot of people, as I mentioned before, that are trying to bring their values and they're trying to integrate kind of like their own personal values within the workplace. Yeah. So I think that, it becomes almost like a work-life integration. They want their job to match the values that they share outside, but also at the same time, the other half of Gen Z is really looking for, they want that clear separation between, hey, this is what I'm going to work for, and then I need to have things that I want to prioritize in my personal life, whether that's personal health, whether that's kind of personal growth as well, or, just keeping those two things separate. But I do see kind of like both ends of the spectrum as we've talked to different people in this generation.
Oh, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I also like that, when a younger generation comes in, and although some older workers may kind of like grumble about those demands that they're placing on work, on companies, it does actually kind of benefit everybody in the end.
I think that the people that have been working in the workforce for quite some time, we can see that the industry has been changing, right? And it's not just that necessarily all the younger people are coming in and trying to change the industry, but it's our customers, our consumers, their buying patterns, their buying habits have changed, right? And so the way that we market ourselves as a company also needs to change. So I think the important thing for for companies and brands to recognize is that instead of trying to have Gen Z come in and conform to maybe some outdated workplace norms, in reality, we should kind of look to strike a balance as, looking at the talent that they bring in just from, the digital skill set that they have, but also the creativity and, the originality that may not exist inside the actual company. And, in addition to that, I think, they can be true change agents to a brand. Like for people that have been working for in the same company, in the same environment for so long, it can be challenging to take an outside perspective. And I think it can be quite refreshing as long as it's positioned correctly to bring people in that are from the younger generation.
And it kind of goes to my last question about that. How does an older generation, like maybe a baby boomer or Gen X, who's bringing in new Gen Z employees and they're managing them, how do they establish that successful relationship? Is it about that respect of their values and showing that? What else can they do?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And you did hit it right there. And I think it is about a level of respect.
Okay.
And the respect is that the people that are have been working in the environment for quite some time, they understand and they have so much knowledge and experience. I think that we need to take a look at, instead of managing the work, managing people, we really need to take a look at shifting that and actually becoming coaches for these people that are coming in. So Gen Z and recent college grads, if you can imagine, they've been living in a structured environment. They go to school, they know what courses they need to take to graduate. They know that if they get a good grade in school, then they're going to graduate successfully with a high GPA.
Yeah.
What does that really teach them about life? Because after they graduate and go into the workforce, they're working in a more autonomous environment. They're expected to know how to act professionally, even though they've never had that opportunity before. So they are definitely smart. They're highly skilled. And a lot of the kind of nuance and processes can be taught from the individual companies. That's not a problem. I definitely think that they can learn that. But I think that as managers, we need to take a look at, instead of just managing people within our own organization, how can we actually shift that and change it so that we are coaching people, mentoring them to be successful, not just in their current role, but successful in the company, in any role, and just kind of within the industry. I think that as I talk to a lot of people that are of the different generations, they have a huge desire to help younger generations succeed. However, if the organization is not positioned correctly, where they're not getting additional exposure, or that's not the priority, it could be a setup for failure, because you're going in there expecting somebody to do the work that they haven't done before. But if you're not coaching them in a way that is respectful or is encouraging, and it doesn't even have to be their direct manager as their coach. I think that, a company's being set up, with peer mentors, with people that are from, different departments, because we all work together collaboratively now. I think it's very important to kind of shift that mindset from being a manager to being a coach or being a mentor. And I think that would be the path to success for a lot of, Gen Z coming in.
That's great advice. I think that you're completely right that, having been mentored myself early on in my career, it not only made me that much more knowledgeable sooner in my career, but also it gave me a level of
confidence, probably.
Confidence and loyalty to that company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was like, this, they really value me and they want to see me succeed, not only here, but after I leave here. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, you're sharing your own personal story, but I think that a lot of people, including myself, I can remember the first time I entered a large organization and I had to work there. I was absolutely terrified, right? I didn't know what to do. I was, and I think that, there's different people that I talked to, and I can definitely find the people that were champions to help me succeed, and the other people that were really just more focused about managing the work. So I think that, now that I look at it, and really that's my motivation, is I don't have a background in higher education. I don't have a background in education at all. But for the past 10 years, I've been working very diligently to work with future leaders and the people and the stakeholders that would be, kind of like incorporating them to be successful kind of after they graduate. It's important for me, as well as probably a lot of other people, is like, we didn't have those same opportunities that some of these people that are coming in now. So we really want to act as motivators and enablers in order for them to be most successful. And sometimes, depending on, who they're influenced by or who they have contact with, they're not really able to see kind of the bigger picture, and really just trying to instill some of that entrepreneurial mindset and confidence in them that, you can be successful in the workforce. I think that just getting additional exposure and talking about these things with people such as yourself will definitely help kind of both generations, or all generations, integrate successfully in the workforce.
Huy Nguyen is Chief Education and Career Development Advisor at Intelligent.com. Read more about the impacts of Gen Z entering the workforce and what it means for the food sciences in the April issue of Food Technology. We'll be back with more Omnivore in a moment, but first, this word from our sponsor.
IFT, the Institute of Food Technologists, invite you to join thousands of food science innovators at IFT FIRST this July 13 through 16 at Chicago's McCormick Place. This premier industry event connects you with cutting-edge technologies, global leaders, and the innovations shaping our food future. Registration is now open. Don't miss this opportunity to be part of the conversation. Secure your spot today at iftevent.org. Again, that's iftevent.org.
Welcome back to Omnivore. I'm Bill McDowell. More than half of consumers from around the world say they plan to consume more functional foods and beverages this year. What's motivating them to make these choices, and which functional ingredients are trending? For the answers to those questions and more, Food Technology's Mary Ellen Kuhn spoke with contributing editor and trends guru Liz Sloan, who's been tracking the functional foods market for several decades.
Well, Liz, thanks for being here today to talk about functional foods. You mentioned in your article that there is a reprioritization of health benefits that consumers, both globally and in the United States, are looking for in functional foods just in the last 2 years. So what's that all about?
It's true. There's a big reshuffling going on both in the United States and globally as to what health benefits consumers most want to get from food and from beverages right now. And here's a couple of them. There's a rise in feel-good claims, looking for products that help you feel better. So for example, globally, improving mood and separately mental energy are now 6 and 7 in the top 10 of the benefits consumers want from food. In the US last year and this year, healthy has popped up to number 2 behind energy in terms of what they were looking for. And some of the other the concerns about aging, like muscle health and endurance, has moved up to number 5. And overall, about half of consumers are really concerned that as they age, they're not going to be able to do as many as the activities as they could when they were younger. And that's become a fairly mainstream concern, with almost 50% of people of all ages talking about that. Now we have some new powerful trends, and they're smaller. Only about 1 in 5 are looking for them, but they involve like metabolic solutions, which is something we really haven't seen before. So about 1 in 5 are looking to aid metabolism, talk about weight, maybe to speed up some weight loss, inflammation, and blood sugar control. And globally, metabolism has moved up to number 8. So it's really a whole new ballgame we have here. Then globally, we have cellular health. It has become the fastest growing supplement area, among the fastest growing, depending on where we're talking about in the world. And that involves anti-aging. So if we nurture cells, it will help slow down the aging of a cell. And particularly in Asia, this has become a really powerful trend, and it's already moving into the United States and clearly abroad.
And one of the things you mentioned and also wrote about in the article is the active living trend. So what kinds of functional products are active lifestyle consumers looking for, and who are those active lifestyle consumers?
Great question. This is a huge market. As a matter of fact, improving everyday performance, which is really what they're after because they're so much more active, is now the number 1 global health benefit they're most apt to look for. And it is just increasing. And in the US, by the way. There's 3 things they're really looking for, some of which we already know are popular for functional foods. Number 1 is energy. Number 2 now is mental energy, which is sort of a new wrinkle that we could probably expand energy drinks, for example, with. And to a lesser extent, but number 3 would be better sports performance. And if you think about it, more than half of Americans exercise more than 3 days a week, at least for 30 minutes. And we have 68 million gym exercisers, people going to the gym to exercise. This is a really huge market. And I think there's a couple of really big missed opportunities here, not just for the type of product, but for who we should target some of these products for. Number 1 is household with kids. They are the most active segment, and we don't think about it that way. And just think parents, for example, are really high on the energy user list and the meal replacement list. And so targeting them with helping them with products to increase their everyday performance is a really big idea. Number 2, globally and in the US, the fastest growing group of people exercising are older. They're over 55 years old. And think of the synergies for functional foods, maybe heart support or joint support or something like that for foods and beverages. The last one is active women. More than half of gym goers are women, actually more than half, and only 2.5% of all sports products are in any way tailored to women. And lastly, the protein lovers, this is their category. Protein is off the charts. It's going to go further off the chart in 2025. One quarter say they will eat more protein. Food and beverages that have a claim of more than 20 grams of protein enjoyed double-digit growth last year. And it's time to spread that around different products. For example, breads, high-protein breads and bakery products are up 60% in sales over the last year. So there's a lot of opportunity in kind of a very large and basic market.
So protein is not going away. And it's also interesting what you mentioned about how specific that is, the 20 grams or more of protein.
Yeah, it's very high, isn't it?
Another trend you discuss in the article is weight management. And in that context, you address the trend in GLP-1 medications to treat diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. There's been a lot of buzz in the food industry, as you know, about these medications' impact on food and beverage sales. It sounds like you expect the impact to be pretty modest, though. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
You're right. I think that this opportunity is going to be truly niche at best, especially for food marketers and beverage marketers. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, despite the hype, last year, 6% of the US adults said they took this drug. Now, that's what they say. It's not necessarily what they do. And about 2/3 of that was for heart and diabetic purposes. Only about a quarter of the 6% was for weight loss. That number is pretty small already. But if you look at like a lot of the medical studies, the RX studies, you'll see that number is probably closer to 2% than even 6%. Still very, very small. Now, I think this whole category is going to slow down just a little bit. There's a lot of factors here. One of them, people only stay on the drug for about 3 months. Nausea, all these other things take them off. There's a lot of side effects. We don't even know some of them. Insurance coverage is still very, very low. $1,500 to $2,000 per month is about the average cost. And there's limited insurance. I said that. And the supply issues are very, very tight. But from a food standpoint, the biggest barrier that I see is the nutritional needs or parameters that we would use to make a diet product or nutrition product for these people is absolutely no different from what that you would do for a regular dieter. So, for example, what's important is high fiber, high protein. I won't go through this whole list, but adequate hydration, right? Low sugar, low calories, portion size, satiety, probiotics for the tummy aches, nutrient density. Big deal. So they're drinking more tea and they're chewing on more mints. That's not going to develop a whole segment of the food industry to be successful. And we see manufacturers jumping into it. But the problem is, for example, ConAgra is putting a user-friendly symbol on healthy choice in some of their products. Well, it is absolutely true, but people generally look for a more differentiating factor, and they're going to get ticked off. There's no difference here between how great the product used to be. So, and that makes this whole thing a little bit more difficult. So what's the hope and what's the promise? 10 years from now, they predict that if this trend were continued, 10% of food units bought in the United States might come from a household that someone is on these drugs. Is that something worth spending billions of dollars on and worth waiting for? It doesn't get my vote. I just don't see it.
Finally, Liz, we always want to tap into your expertise. So what advice would you give food and drink marketers to help give them an edge when they're entering the functional food market?
That's a great question. I think there's 3, and they're very simple. One is where there's an opportunity to go multifunctional, do it. Dollars are tight. They're going to be tight this year. Everyone wants to be healthier, and you don't want them to try and trade off. Is it going to be weight is it going to be energy? And then you're older. And so what about my heart? So maybe we can mix these 2 things together. So I think that's number 1. Number 2, I think that we forget that healthy food is also food, and it should be great tasting. So I think wherever we can upgrade these products from a culinary standpoint, make them more interesting, The mushrooms will allow you to do that right there, the difference in all the mushrooms. And flavors. People eat flavor. And even the cuisines you might want to use for something, because certain cuisines like Mediterranean or Japanese are known to be healthier or perceived to be healthier. So there's a lot of opportunity, and that helps sell a product, let's face it. And then number 3 is my favorite, is look for new venues. And one of the ones that I find absolutely flooring are restaurants. If you just look, the non-alcoholic beverage sales in restaurants last year were almost $200 billion. They're 191, I think. And what we've seen is savvy beverage marketers going into restaurants, and energy drinks are now 3% of that number. That's a big number. And smoothies, healthy smoothies, are now 6%. And just think of what else juices and what other functional beverages would also have high appeal in restaurants. So Data Essential has done some really interesting studies. And what they're finding is menu call-outs are becoming very instrumental for those that are going to a restaurant and interested in eating more healthfully. And for example, last year, protein had the biggest influence of potential descriptors on menus, followed by natural, followed by low sugar, followed by organic, followed by, believe it or not, gluten-free. So there's a lot of promise here, and it's something that if I were in the business of the functional business right now, I think I would take a look at. And lastly, don't overlook the convenience store, because people think that that people are running in there, especially younger people, and they don't want anything healthy. And it's really not true. For example, 50% of all energy beverages sold in a convenience store. That's a very big number. And if you look at the health data on their interests, it's extremely high. It's as high as the general public, if not in some cases higher. So that's what I would ask everybody to take a second look at.
Liz Sloan is president of Sloan Trends Incorporated and a longtime food technology contributing editor. You can learn more about the top 10 trends that will define the functional foods market in 2025 in our April issue. The modern food system is under pressure to meet global nutritional needs while minimizing its environmental footprint. According to Refed Insights, food waste remains a significant challenge, with nearly 40% of global food production lost or wasted annually. Upcycling is a growing and evolving solution, repurposing food waste products into nutritious and marketable offerings. By some accounts, the global upcycled foods market is projected to reach $97 billion by 2031. Food Technology's Julie Larson-Brisher spoke with Lara Ramdin, widely known as the Upcycling Queen, to talk about how upcycling not only reduces food waste, but also offers a chance to enhance nutrition, support circular economies, and provide sustainable solutions to food insecurity.
Hi, Dr. Laura. I really enjoyed your recent article for Food Tech on upcycling and the great strides we're making in advancing this approach to reducing food waste and improving sustainability and food security across the globe.
It's lovely to be here, Julie. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Well, let's dive right in. What do you think are the main drivers behind the uptake of upcycling initiatives throughout the world?
Well, I think the first thing to say is food waste seems, in today's environment, like a crime, really. 40% of the food that is made is wasted, which is a huge proportion. Most of that, by the way, comes from food that's wasted at home. And most people don't realize that food goes to landfill and therefore contributes to the emissions of greenhouse gases, etc. The thing that motivates me the most is that that's just wasted food. And that's food that could be going to somebody else who is potentially hungry and in need of that food. I think where we see an adoption of upcycling within food companies is because we have these linear food systems that have generated food waste over time and people don't know what to do with it. And now they're seeing that it's valuable ingredients, valuable macronutrients, and that can be maybe turned into a revenue center, and at the same time be used as a way of generating ingredients that can then go into food to create more accessible nutrition. But I think that most people that work in bigger food companies and food systems are probably looking at that to generate some revenue. And certainly the people that are members of the Upcycle Food Association, there are about 230, 240 or so. They started their business because they were motivated by reducing food waste, because it is a problem, but also because they saw an opportunity to create a company, right? And they saw an opportunity to create something innovative. So I think it's a balance between seeing an issue, seeing a problem, being really bothered by it, thinking this is not right when there are so many hungry people in the world, but also seeing an opportunity to say, okay, well, there could be some money to be made from this, to be truthful about it.
Right. That's interesting because in your article, you write that upcycling unearths nutritional ingredients and bioactive treasure, quote unquote. Can you talk about some of the newly discovered waste streams and their potential to add value?
I mean, most of the ingredients that I worked in, I mostly worked on brewer's spent grain. And in brewer's spent grain, when it's processed correctly, you usually get about 50% fiber and 30% protein. So here is yet another source of novel protein. You know how everybody's talking about protein right now, protein. Nobody really died from a lack of protein, but they can die from a lack of fiber, because fiber is this superfood that has so many benefits downstream. And every time I think about upcycled flour, I think about the fiber and actually rescuing that and putting that back into food. Every day there's more and more people who are finding overlooked sources of macro and micronutrients. So there's some research going on with one of our Upcycle Food Foundation research fellows in Turkey, looking at waste tomatoes and capturing the antioxidants from waste tomatoes, so the lycopene and the antioxidants, not necessarily to put back into food, but actually, believe it or not, to use in wound healing applications. So, and this is where my previous life in beauty meets my current life in food and upcycling. It's like a cataclysm of worlds. Also, pectin in waste tomatoes can be used as a sort of wound healing occlusive. When I worked at Dole, we were looking at the pectin in banana skins to be used as a sort of wound healing patch on the skin, for example. I'm really interested in the work that's coming out of Israel, looking at olive stones and olive stones being used as an alternative flour. There's a company called Fen Olives that has a new process that's looking at how to transform olive stones into flour to be used in baked goods. I mean, I think that's really novel. And there's a company in Switzerland called Renat who has a new proprietary process that means that the whole of the almond can be used in their process in order to generate material that can then be used in milk and other products. So normally when you have almonds, you process them and you take off the hull, and in the hull is left behind all this fiber, this amazing super duper macronutrient. And Renat have got a new processing method that means that you can keep the almond whole. There's a lot going on in the upcycling food space, a lot of science, really, really good science and R&D that will mean a plethora of macro and micronutrients that will be available to food designers.
That's great. What do you think are the main challenges, though, in the area of upcycling? And do you think they can be overcome or transformed into opportunities for food companies or even consumers?
Upcycling is definitely the longer term game, Julie. So it's something that we need to be consistently invested in over time. It's not necessarily a short term win. And in an environment where we're experiencing very volatile ingredient costs, that's very hard for a procurement person or a food designer to include ingredients that currently might be a bit more expensive than the standard ingredient. For example, if you're looking at two sources of flour and one is 1x, and then your upcycled ingredient is probably 1.5x or 2x. It's difficult for that procurement person and that R&D person to say, okay, well, we're going to buy the one that's 1.5 or 2x currently as we are, because food is generally so expensive. So input costs of raw materials, input costs of upcycled materials is definitely a big challenge. And it's a vicious circle, because you need processing technology in order to get at that treasure, to unearth that treasure. But that's where the cost comes from, right? The cost of using that processing technology has to go somewhere. I will say that probably the bigger challenge is the consumer. We continually, those of us that work in the sort of upcycling space, continue to evolve our messaging, continue to evolve the way in which we engage consumers. We are moving away from utilizing the word waste when you talk about upcycled ingredients, for obvious reasons. I think it's still a big challenge to get the consumer used to the idea that we would be reutilizing resources and putting that back into food systems, and that's a positive thing. We are still very much in a linear food system, so we're still in food system 5. You know, if food systems have evolved from the dawn of time, we're now in food system 5, which means that we produce our food in a linear way, high speed, low cost, and every piece of food looks, feels, tastes exactly the same way every time you try it. It's a tall order to take the consumer with us to say, if we incorporate some of these ingredients into these systems, there might be some differences from one piece of bread, from one snack, from one cookie to another. The consumer's not quite ready to accept that, unless there's a very, very specific positioning for that product and or brand in the upcycled space. So to introduce that idea to mainstream brands, we're still somewhat away from that, basically. But I'm hopeful that we can, as a community, move the system away from being linear to circular. But that's a very, very that's a long-term goal, I would say.
Right. Well, what excites you about future applications of upcycling in the global food system?
I am excited by circularity. I think there's so many opportunities in a circular economy. What I also think about is and we talk about this in the Sustainable Food Systems division, when you go to college and you learn how to do food science and food product development, depending on where you go, you're not always being exposed to what a circular food looks like. You're not necessarily learning how to design food to be circular. So what excites me is the potential for more workforce development. I love the idea, and this is something I really want to do, is to go and teach students about how to think about circularity when they're designing food, so that when they go to get their job at the company X, they're already set up for success to be able to think like that. So I see I see this as a skill and a capability that we can provide to our future generation of product development scientists, engineers, marketers, to think in circular terms. We're at a pivotal moment right now where we can transfer all of that knowledge to people, to the future generation. I think also, the opportunities are endless, because we have all this amazing processing technology, whether there be enzymatic hydrolysis, fermentation, a myriad of processing technologies that we can use to transform food into something else, to unearth. So we've got fiber, but fiber, when that material is fermented, it can transform into something else. And we can release all these other macronutrients and micronutrients that ultimately can be used to feed people. I mean, we're all here because we care about feeding people. And actually, if you asked anybody that we work with, they would care about the fact there's 47 million people who are food insecure in the US. And they would be bothered by it, and they'd want to do something about it. And I think upcycling, when we figured out that value equation, when we figured out that economies of scale and the cost of producing these upcycled ingredients, I think it will be an enabler to creating more nutrition and more accessible food for people.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you. That's really exciting. Well, it's been great talking with you today, Lara, and I'll keep watching this space. I'm sure we all will.
Thank you so much for your time, Julie.
Lara Ramdin is Chief Scientist and LA Ambassador of FoodX Climate, where she champions initiatives to revolutionize food systems by integrating circular approaches and advocates for food sovereignty. You can find her article, Upcycling, The Future is Now, in the April issue of Food Technology.
Our thanks to IFT FIRST, Food Improved by Research, Science, and Technology, for supporting this episode. Don't miss this landmark food science event coming to Chicago this July. Explore the future of food innovation and register today at iftevent.org.
And that wraps up this episode of Omnivore. Thanks again to all our guests and my colleagues at Food Technology. Omnivore is produced and distributed by the Institute of Food Technologists. If you enjoyed today's show and want to learn more about Food Technology Magazine or how to join the conversation by becoming an IFT member, visit ift.org/membership. For more in-depth discussion about innovation in the science of food, check out IFT's other podcast, Side Dish, on the News and Publications page of ift.org. If you have comments or suggestions for future shows, just send us an email. The address is editors@ift.org. For the entire team at Food Technology and IFT, I'm Bill McDowell. Thanks for listening, and join us again for our next episode.